Which brings us, of course, on to the question of implementation. So who's going to talk about the implementation? Chris, given that you are the author of these slides, maybe you want to talk about the implementation of the Act.
That's right. And everyone blame me if you think they're rubbish. No, that's right. So
absolutely, yes. We don't forget we got a disclaimer at the end.
Yeah, please send complaints to Christopher McFarland. So you're quite right. So looking at implementation. So for those of you at home who've been following the ALN Act across its long history, I mean, it has been through consultations even before it was called the ALN Act and the ALN Bill, as it was prior to that. It's gone through many different revisions and a very long history. So turning to implementation, we have a slide for this again. And it was intended to be implemented last year in September 2020. And ironically, before the pandemic, it was decided that more time is needed to do that, to implement the various processes needed for it. And it was postponed until September this year. Then, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has happened, and that has also changed. So there was a very detailed consultation and implementation document put forward, and that was setting out the strategies that would be in place. But that's now been superseded by a statement issued by the Welsh Government in February 2021. But that statement from February 2021, at the time of recording, has now been superseded again by a new statement from the new Minister for Education in July 2021. So we've added this to the slide, and it explains that following the previous statement on the 2nd of February, the Welsh Government has decided, due to the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, that they should change the implementation of the bill further to ensure that it can be rolled out smoothly. And they've now split the way it's going to be implemented in the first year. So this means for those children who are or are newly identified as having additional learning needs, that is those without already identified special educational needs or are not awaiting and undergoing SEN assessment, will still move to the new ALN system from the 1st of September 2021. However, for those children who attend maintained school, including a pupil referral unit, and who have already identified SEN via School Action or School Action Plus, the new system will apply from the 1st of January 2022 instead. So this is a shift of position from the February implementation, which had planned to implement the Act for those on School Action Plus straight away, and then to delay the implementation for those with a statement. Now, what will the impact of this be on those pupils? Well, there will be a delay, as we've talked about, from the planned rollout to those with statements. And of course, for that, we weren't too concerned because statements will stay in force. They will still be statutorily enforceable documents. So, of course, for those pupils, unless something is already wrong and action should already be taken to resolve that now, if things are still going well, then you have nothing to fear because that will stay in place until the new Act rolls in and until their plan is changed from a statement to an individual development plan. But it does now have some complexities for those on School Action Plus, in that they won't be getting their individual development plans in the first term of next year. It will move into the second year. However, once again, if things are already working well under School Action Plus, it's important to recognise that those actual systems on the ground shouldn't change. So if your child is receiving support under School Action Plus and that is working, it will not be taken away. It will just take a little bit longer to be formalised into a plan. If you are one of those parents of pupils or a young person yourself who is dissatisfied with the support you're getting under School Action Plus, then again, you can request that there be a decision made about your additional learning needs. And of course, then you can take further action to try and improve the quality of support you're getting. So there are still options to take. And I think although this is a disappointment, particularly given the long lead-in to the Act that we've had, and obviously the postponement from last year to this year for implementation, I think the fact that it's only around 3 months, just over 3 months of further time, and it will occur in January of this year during the school year, and this is only for those pupils who are already receiving special educational provision, I think makes it a fairly reasonable extension in light of the pandemic. But I have to say it is definitely a disappointment. Well, I think that neatly leads us on to a bit of a discussion of our thoughts on the Act. So we've gone through in detail, I suppose, or summarised detail as best as I can explain it, the various sections of the Act. So we now need to discuss it. So I will start with some positives because I think it's important to focus on the positives. So as we talked about earlier, the coverage of special educational provision as it currently is and additional learning provision as it will be has extended significantly to those children and young people in Wales. So firstly, it goes up to 25 rather than 19 as it currently ends. It goes into further educational college, which it currently doesn't with the same level of scope that it does for those not in further educational college. It also includes those pupils who historically would not have received a statement, and also those in England who wouldn't receive an education healthcare plan. So the coverage of the Act is far broader than the current legislation and the legislation in England, which means a lot more children and young people will have enforceable rights under statutory documents, which I think is very much a good thing. And of course, they will last through different and longer stages of education, so incorporating further educational colleges and up to the age of 25. So I think for me, those are definitely the positives, of course, alongside the duty to decide. So meaning that you'll no longer make a request, wait 6 weeks and be told, no, we're not even going to assess. You now actually have a decision being made about whether or not you have an ALN. And of course, consequently, if you do have ALN, a plan must be provided. So I think there is certainly a bit of streamlining and a bit of certainty there in the process. But Charlotte, I mean, what are your thoughts on the Act? You know, having practiced substantially in England, also with some Welsh cases. But what are your views?
It's a very mixed bag. I can see lots of potential improvement, certainly in terms of, I mean, there has been a pretty gross disparity between the scope for what I am now old-fashionedly going to call special educational provision in Wales as opposed to the situation across the border. And that has been a source of constant, I think, frustration and distress to parents of Welsh children with special educational needs, and rightly so. And I do think that the extension of the regime to 25, as you say, the end of those, the end of those sorts of very complex cases, potentially the end of the troublesome policy in relation to just how much further education you can expect the Welsh Government to fund, all of that for young people who've got the potential to succeed on further education courses. The clarification of all of that and the bringing of all of that within one regime with a clear endpoint of 25, I think is really positive. In terms of all children with additional learning needs being entitled to an IDP, I think that's a positive development as well. I do find it unwieldy that you have some children with ALN who don't have plans and are kind of reliant on informal arrangements within schools, which was the case under the Education Act and is still the case under the Children and Families Act. That kind of two-tier system isn't desperately helpful. I think it's helpful to just say there will be a plan. I don't necessarily think that it's a bad thing that schools supervise plans for some children. I think that the difficulty is going to come when you're talking about those children who really are not going to be able to manage just on the ALP that schools provide, because at that point it really is going to vary quite drastically depending on how clued up the school is about ALN and how motivated the school is in terms of ensuring that children who are not spotting children who aren't coping and making sure that they end up with plans that are overseen by the local authority. So, I think the proof of the pudding is going to be in the eating, as always. I can see some bumps ahead, but I can also see cause for real optimism. Yeah,
I think that's definitely a good thing.
Do you know what the trouble with this is? You said all the good things, you leave all the bad things to me.
Yeah.
No, I'm just like the Black Death.
Yeah.
I agree with everything you say. I mean, there's lots to welcome about this new legislation. I mean, there really is. I mean, not least the fact. One thing what really frustrated me is that it's been nearly 10 years since people in England have been able to appeal an annual review, for example, of what should go into the plan. And goodness me, why it's been so long in Wales for those people to be able to do that is beyond me, frankly. I also think it's extraordinary that we've had to wait 2 years for this legislation to come in when it's been on the when it's been fully passed. I mean, it's disappointing, that is. I'm just giving all bad things, really. But overall, the legislation, I think, does give a process, a procedure that's now open to many people to do something about it when things go wrong. I think in a nutshell, I'd say that the focus of attention is merely shifting from what was traditionally an analysis of the quality of one's assessment to the quality of one's plan. That's all that's really happened by the removal of the need to appeal the contents of whether there's a decision with whether or not someone should be assessed. If everyone gets a plan, the emphasis is going to be on the quality of the plan. Simple as that. And that's going to flag up all the same things that we now at this point in time argue about in the assessment. So I'm not so sure if that's such a wonderful thing, really. Particularly, it's not so wonderful if you get a load of very substandard plans. That's not going to be helpful to anyone. And I take on board the point that Chris made at the outset about whether or not there's going to be this legal requirement for the same degree of specificity that exists traditionally in law up to now, both in England and Wales, whether that's going to be finding its way into the tribunal system, and whether we're going to get plans which are going to be much more vague, not least due to the fact that the duty to maintain them is going to be upon the school, and we come back to the judicial review point that I made earlier. So I'm not really sure overall. I cautious optimism, I guess, about it. But I think probably if this was on a weighing scales, I'd be more cautious than I am optimistic, sadly. Because in practice, I think 30 years of doing this has made me pretty
jaded,
pessimistic. So certainly cynical. So I mean, in terms of the way forward, though, generally, I do like the fact that at long last, young people are not having to debate their case, their learning and skills plan through the Welsh Assembly government processes. We've got a vehicle to debate that. I think that in practice, we're going to see delay. And so the headline word that I think will haunt Wales from here on is delay. And I don't mean delay in deciding the plan. I mean delay in deciding the critical provision to meet that plan, to meet those needs. I think, and then even if there's going to be a delay in relation to quantifying it, to specifying it, and I think there will be a delay in the implementation of it.